Today we're going to learn about a guy who went from being kicked out of high school to earning over $100 billion for his shareholders, outperforming the likes of Warren Buffett. But many don't know his name, which really speaks to how he operated.
I would describe Bob Weissman as successful in just about every aspect of his life.
This film hopefully will be a representation of who my dad really is.
The most significant talent that I attribute to Bob is his humanness, his ability to actually create and build these large organizations without having to tell everybody that he does.
He lived the path that every Babson student aspires to live, of starting companies, leading companies, exiting companies, employing hundreds of thousands of people, and commanding corporate empire that truly changed the world and touched people's lives.
Everyone you'll see on this film is intended to give you a glimpse into the person that he was, how he thought, what he believed, and what he valued.
You were the only person on earth when you were with him, but at the end of the day, he got his messages across, and you would climb a mountain for Bob Weissman.
He had my back, he had my interests, he wanted me to be better. As a result, I could never get enough of his wisdom and insight.
He wasn't just a successful business person. He's a successful human being, someone who has left this place better than when he got here.
One of the most important alumni this institution has ever had, for a million reasons that many people won't understand until they hear this video, and others won't understand at all.
Where did Bob come from? I mean, we came from New Haven, Connecticut. Bob and I were involved in ham radio kind of stuff in high school, and electronics, and basically self-learning things, okay? We were always impatient. We were viewing school as kind of an interesting environment, but not exactly totally where we were coming from. Mainly, we were really like forward-looking.
I was really a qualified nerd, a card-carrying nerd, and when I was 13, I became a radio amateur. And when I was 15, I was licensed as a first-class radio telephone engineer by the Federal Communications Commission. When I was 18, I filed 3 patents in electron optics. Thought I was going to be a scientist.
Bob talked about these different ways of learning to communicate. I did not understand a thing that this man was talking about.
There was no techie in America till Bob decided to get interested in computers and things and stuff, and he was incredibly, he understood technology.
I came to the conclusion when I was perhaps 16 years old that the world should be managed by scientists, that they would make better decisions, and life would be better for everybody. And then I discovered that the world didn't seem to respond in ways that were consistent with that model. And so as I examined what was going on, I said the way that the world works, Darwin was right, it is adaptability, and that is what allows for progress to happen.
When Bob came into our life, he had twice dropped out of the University of Connecticut because he was bored. Now, you hear of people dropping out of school because they didn't get the grades. He was bored.
Bob went to work for Olin Matheson Research, and he was doing some interesting things. I remember talking to him on the phone. I said, "All right, Bob, what are you doing down there?" He says, "Well, we're welding zirconium boxes. The welds have to be really perfect." I said, "Okay, what goes in the zirconium boxes?" He was like, like uranium." I was like, "Oh, That's interesting. He said, yeah, the welds have to really be perfect. I said, so let me take a wild guess. These zirconium boxes with uranium in them end up in an atomic submarine somewhere? He was like, yeah, it could be something like that.
While I was working at that job, which was a nuclear fuel research laboratory, I realized that my boss was an engineer and his boss was an engineer and his boss was a businessman and wasn't nearly as smart, but was making all the decisions. And I decided that I wanted to be in a position to control my future, which is why I went to Babson rather than going to engineering school. I was married and I had a child. It was June of the year, and I arrived at the door of the head of admissions, Nick Rzetsky, and told him I wanted to go to Babson. And he said, I'm sorry, but we don't have any more dorm space. And I said, that's not necessary because I have a family and a child. I'm not looking for dorm space. And he said, well, we don't have any classroom space open. All the chairs are filled. And I said, if you allow me to come, I will buy a chair and carry it from room to room. And he looked at me and he said, okay. And I was in.
Bob Weissman came to Babson in 1961, and to a degree he never left. Babson has always been on the top of his mind.
I remember the dean of the graduate school and I talked about what is an entrepreneur. He said, well, an entrepreneur is somebody who likes risk, because obviously being an entrepreneur is risky, and if you're going to do it, you must like risk. And I said, I don't think so. I think it is the opposite. I think that an entrepreneur doesn't see risk, and that the crunch comes at 2 o'clock on that morning when they're facing the wall and saying, oh crap, what do I do? And that the entrepreneur is the one who can manage that successfully and keep going and eventually succeed. Because I guess even then it reflects the fact that I must have thought at that time that you start out wrong and you keep getting better, and that's called success.
The education that they offered him fit what his mentality and what he needed, to the point where he was teaching courses at Babson as a senior. Hadn't even graduated yet.
Bob is the smartest person in the room, unless Jan is in the room. But he is never one to let on to that. He didn't think about a career, I think, until he got through Babson and learned everything there was to learn there.
After Babson, my first job was working for a soap company. In the second job, I was controller of a paper bag company. 3 years later, I was head of corporate development for the parent company. Then I became the president of a cable television equipment and electronic instrument company. And from there, got into the software business and time sharing, and became CEO of that company. And then Dun & Bradstreet, which acquired that company, where I ran the division for a couple of years and then became president of the parent company, ultimately chairman. Then from the breakup of Dun & Bradstreet, I became chairman of one of the follow-on companies. So lots of different functions in different places.
He was running essentially a cloud computing company 40 years ago. He was delivering broadband access 20 years before we had a thing called the World Wide Web. Before the AT&Ts of the world were selling broadband access, National CSS was the company. If you look at cable TV, which is so pervasive today, he was in the cable TV business in the 1960s. So he was really, really far ahead of his time. I think he shared that he built his first computer, personal computer, in 1975.
He didn't see a personal computer that sat on a desk. He saw the information and the access to information that was going to be readily available to everyone. And that's why when you look at the path that he's taken, it's never been a tangible asset.
The sale of National CSS to Dun & Bradstreet. We had just gone from a $50 million a year to $110 million. Business is going pretty well. But I had seen the future. I had gone on the board of a little company that was the first personal computer retail outlet in the country. I had built my first computer 5 years earlier, and it was not a useful tool. And I saw what was going to happen, and I saw what was going to happen to the cost curve.
He sold our company, National CSS, to Dun & Bradstreet about 15 hours before the computer time-sharing business, which was what Dun & Bradstreet was in, fell apart and went away, began to deteriorate, never to be heard of again.
So Bob was also on the board of directors of Cognizant, which has become one of the most successful outsourcing firms in the world.
I would say the best advice that Bob ever gave me and the company was this idea of staying focused on doing a small number of things, but doing them really well. Bob drove that really, really hard. We still have debates about what is that set of things that we're going to do and be really, really very good at. And equally importantly, when we have that conversation, we ask ourselves explicitly, what are the things that we're choosing not to do?
Bob managed an organization from an analog organization into a digital arena, from a US-based organization into a global arena. These qualities and these skill sets that he demonstrated managed a tumultuous period of change in the industries that he was leading, a level of change probably as significant as many of the changes that our students are likely to experience as they look at this. So don't write it off, my friends. Understand that there are some timeless lessons about you as a leader, and then most importantly, about you as a talent developer that you should never forget after listening to Bob's story.
The other thing Bob taught me was humor. That humor is applicable anywhere, even in the business world.
My dad's sense of humor, it manifests itself in a lot of different ways. He tells jokes, he tells stories, but sometimes he just does things to be funny. I can remember him coming home one night, dressed in his suit in a watchman cap, coming in the door, and the watchman cap had a pig snout on it and pig's ears. And he didn't say anything about it, he just wore it. I find it hysterical. Can't you tell by the look on my face? I'm hysterical.
He was funny, like Jerry Seinfeld. He was witty, like Lily Tomlin or Steve Martin. And he was silly, like the Three Stooges.
Bob is the type of person that can just draw you into a story, and you're just enraptured, and you're listening, and you're just waiting, and it's a joke 9 times out of 10. And I never to this day have I seen it coming. I think he's telling me the truth, and it's a joke.
He likes to do things that might get him in a little trouble, maybe, once in a while.
You have had an outstanding year. Your performance is superb. I think that you are demonstrating yet again that individually and as a team, you are winners. Not only did you win in 1990, you won big in 1991, and I think that we can look forward to you winning big in 1992. Save a place for me at your next big meeting because I intend to be there. Right now I've got a meeting of my own I've got to go to. In fact, there's a board of directors meeting about to start in a minute. So let me just finish by saying thanks for 1991. Good luck in 1992.
He can tell jokes, but he also is a great listener. So Bob listens not only to the spoken word, but he listens to what's going on in the room. He listens to the nonverbal cues.
And he knows the right answers almost all the time. But that doesn't help anybody continue to grow as a person unless they can get to those same answers or ones like it on their own. And that's what Bob understands about people better than anybody.
It's much harder to know the right questions to ask to move people to the answers than it is to tell them the answers. It's much harder to do that, but it's also much more effective because the answers are theirs, not yours.
He's almost always the last person to speak at trustee meetings, and people wait for it. He doesn't speak last because he's ending the discussion, but rather because I believe he wants to hear everyone else's point of view before he speaks.
He's showed me that besides patience, that understanding the entire story is really important to giving the best responses.
He took me for a ride, and I was trying to tell him, all right, this is what I'd like to do with my career now, and how do you manage people? And he said, there's 4 types of people. There's people that know everything and want to learn, people who know everything, don't want to learn, people who know nothing and want to learn, and people who know nothing and don't want to learn. You tell me who you want on your team. And I will never forget those words. And if it was up to me, I probably would have fired about 25 people by now. But, that's...
He is an information maven. Everything that he focuses on is knowing more, consuming more, assimilating more. I remember he'd have a stack of magazines next to his chair in our family room. And it was on every topic. There were car magazines, and there were sports magazines, and there were photography magazines. He would read everything.
New Year's Eve, Y2K, we were at the house in Shelburne. The television was on, and we were shocked that Bob knew all the words to We Didn't Start the Fire when Billy Joel's performance came on.
So I asked him about this and what you have to do when to achieve this level of apperception, and his answer was, you have to just consume. Don't limit yourself to your interests. Just read, watch, observe, and take it in as much as you possibly can. And the more of that you do, the more things will start drawing connections between each other.
You don't have to become the Oracle of Delphi and know everything. If you know a little bit more, a little bit faster, react a little bit faster, be prepared to adapt a little bit faster on a relative basis, you will do better. That's true regardless of whether you're going to be a football coach or a captain of industry.
When Bob joined the Cognizant board, we were a very small company. We were several $100 million in revenue compared to the $12 or $14 billion that we are today. And Bob has not only been an extraordinary board member through that journey, but he's been able to be relevant at every step along the way in that journey. From the time when we were a small company and facing one set of issues to today when we are a much bigger company facing a very different set of issues.
Bob believes, at the core, that institutions need to continuously adapt to changing circumstances and changing times.
And if you think about adaptability, it says, I'm never going to quite be right. Let's accept it. Let's embrace it. Let's say, not, am I right? How do I get better? That's true in your life, in your business, and in anything that you're doing. And so Babson as an organism does that. It does it itself. I've tried to do it in my business, and I think it's a lesson which has guided me throughout my life.
Think about what he did. He went into an old, established corporate thing and said, this isn't going to work. We got to do something. And I can't imagine the flack he got up front from all these people that have been there for 100 years, and this is how we do it, and that's how we're going to do it. And he goes, not anymore.
So I can remember vividly Bob calling a few of his executives into a conference room, checking to see how we were all doing great. How's the business? Great. Good, he said, because it's always important to make changes when you have strength. And Bob revealed to us the plan to break the company up into 3 pieces.
Took the job in 94 and 96 restructured the company because I saw, the investment banker part of me, I saw that the property was dramatically undervalued for Wall Street reasons.
2 presidents of the United States worked for the Dun & Bradstreet Corporation. It was viewed as one of the most important and historical breakups of an American icon company in the history of Wall Street.
And so when we announced that we were going to break it up, the market cap of the company was $5.7 billion. And 5 years later, it was $112 billion.
The only way that you can improve and excel is to try new things. He's very well aware that failure is really kind of what makes you succeed.
I can remember some years ago having a head of corporate planning who reported to me. And ultimately he had to retire because his view was, let's really spend the time to develop good plans. And if we develop good plans, then we can hand them out and they'll get done. And I finally said to him, look, you're a determinist. I'm a probabilist. I know that all plans go to hell the moment they are invoked. And what it's all about is getting information and feedback and learning from it and going back at it a little bit better.
So I called my dad and said, hey, I need a quote about entrepreneurship. And he said, if you risk and never fail, you didn't risk enough.
Well, the first constant is that things will always change.
Bob wants people to fail because you'll learn more in failure than you do in success. And if you're not failing sometimes, then it means you're not trying hard enough or you're not doing enough. And the evidence I have to that is I had a similar philosophy when I ran my business, and I told him about it. And he really liked it, which was first 1 to 5 mistakes wins, no cheating by doing it on purpose. And you got to send them into me as soon as you get your 5 and what you learn from it.
Speed is perhaps the major difference between the way that we teach at Babson today and the way I was taught 50 years ago. That pace of change is not going to slow down.
One of the things that I think was really interesting that shaped who I am today, my dad just being completely under the radar, just low profile, chairman, CEO of Dun & Bradstreet, extremely powerful position. I remember we were at a holiday party and there were a bunch of guys talking. My dad was part of the conversation and was off to the side listening. Going around the room, oh, I'm this and I'm that. And when it came to my dad, obviously had the highest position amongst the folks in the group. My dad said, I'm in operations.
I have a thing about being humble. People have said, I was invited to a meeting of wives of chief executive officers or presidents. It was a morning thing with a speaker, and I said, what's the topic? And the gal said, it's how to live with a CEO or a president. And I said, no, I don't think so. I'm not coming to that. Oh, she said, it really will be good. And I thought about it, and I said, I am gonna come. And I would like to speak after they speak. It'll take about 5 minutes to say, that's his day job. When you come home, you're not anybody special. You still take the trash out. okay, and pick your dish off the table and put it in the sink. And the woman said to me, don't come, don't come, don't come.
If you forget where you came from, you've lost a lot of the lessons of life. Bob never forgot where he came from. In absolute opulent success, he did not live an opulent life. Of course, your Janet would have killed him if he tried, but anyway.
During his remarks at my husband's memorial service, Bob said, hard times are irrelevant, bad things happen, but if you are true to your convictions, you will succeed. Surround yourself with people that support you, that entertain your crazy ideas, make you laugh, and believe in your inevitable success.
This is a man that had a kid while he was attending college. This is a guy that had 2 open heart surgeries and still talked to me about how he benches more than I do and how he still does martial arts at the gym despite his health conditions. If there was one lesson that I would give to future folks based on the example of Bob Weissman, is that you have no excuse to not follow your dreams, to not follow your passions, and achieve the honorable, whatever that may be to you personally. Bob Weissman did it in many, many different ways. Babson teaches that at the moment, and I feel like no matter how much the school changes, at its core, that's one of the central teachings the school has.
He really proves, okay, that a great CEO can be a great human being. And that's often something that many of our students find it difficult to believe.
There are a lot of bright kids out there that don't have a chance. And this is what he wanted. And it was really his decision because it's his money. I don't think of it as my money. You know, I would save quarters in a sock in my drawer. I wouldn't spend anything if I could get away with it. Okay? But he is very charitable, and I said that's a great idea. Because it gives kids, and Bob did not come from a well-to-do family, so he had his chance to make his mark.
You have people that view the world in 2 different ways. There's a pie there, and if I take a piece of the pie, well, half the pie, and then half the pie is left, and that's all there is for everybody else. Producers don't view the world that way. They view the world of, well, okay, we're running out of pie, we've got to make more pie. And so Bob has a passion for producers and people that can create. I believe the reason why he doesn't give necessarily to, feed the hungry, or all worthy, fantastic causes, necessary causes, is that he wants to create more pies.
No one ever seems to ask, where does the money come from that they distribute? And the answer is, it comes out of our economic system. And so I said, at Babson, we have a group of talented, energized young people who want to participate in that system and create wealth that can be used for lots of purposes, including their own needs and the needs of society. And if you think about it, this is a way of immortality, if you will, because your good works will continue to provide benefits to society for a very long time.
The kind of thing that brings people to success today is not a lot different than it was 100 years ago. And it's not going to be a lot different than it is 100 years from now.
Don't wait for somebody else to make something happen. Go make it happen yourself.
Be true to yourself and be humble.
Listen in places that don't exist for any other people. You have to always be kind to everyone.
Look at the world. Look at what's happening. Things which you think are irrelevant today will hit you between the eyes potentially tomorrow, or create a wonderful new opportunity for you. Beyond that, do well and remember Babson. Pay it forward.